I now call Ms Nicole Flint, the member for Boothby, to give evidence. For the Hansard record, will you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Nicole Flint, member for Boothby.
Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt for Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to discussion.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to appear today to discuss my experience of the 2019 federal election campaign in my seat of Boothby. I have a short opening statement for the committee. I was one of 7 Liberal Party members targeted by GetUp at the 2019 federal election campaign. The abuse, aggression, stalking, misogynistic bullying behaviour and vandalism and the deeply sexist and misogynistic attacks I sustained and endured represent behaviour that I never want to see repeated in an Australian election campaign again. Of the 7 Liberal Party members on GetUp's hit list, I was the only backbencher targeted, the only member in my first term of Parliament, and I was also the only woman targeted. My male colleagues were all current or former members of Cabinet. They had done a minimum of 3 terms parliamentary service and they'd served at least 9 years in the Parliament. The treatment that they were subjected to was similarly appalling and disgusting and disgraceful. Despite the attacks on me and my relative inexperience in terms of elections and my lack of seniority, I was very proud that I managed to increase my primary vote and record the highest primary vote of any of the members targeted. Despite knowing that I succeeded against the orchestrated attacks on me by GetUp and Labor and the unions, I've spoken out about their campaign against me because I want to ensure that no future candidate or MP, whether they are male or female, whether they're from Labor or the Greens or the Liberal Party or the Nationals or whether they're an independent, has to go through what I went through and what I saw my colleagues go through. I don't want people discouraged from running for local or state or federal government because they think that they might be subject to these disgusting attacks. The behaviour that I had to endure was deeply un-Australian and it has to stop. For me, the aggressive behaviour took many forms and formats in what I can only describe as a deliberate and coordinated campaign against me by GetUp, Labor and the unions, and I do believe that its aim was to try to break me and stop me campaigning. The campaign was lengthy and sustained and it began in earnest in January 2019 and did not stop until the federal election on the 18th of May. It involved flooding my electorate with print material attacking me, flooding my electorate with social media material attacking me, flooding my electorate with adverts and, of course, with phone calls personally attacking me and calling me evil. There was repeat protest action by GetUp and the unions. GetUp worked in unison with the stalker who targeted me for the 5 months leading up to the election. And the Labor Party also ran Adelaide metropolitan-wide prime-time adverts personally attacking me as well. The personal, intense and unjustified negative campaign run against me incited dangerous and destructive and misogynistic behaviour from sympathisers and from people who I believe were volunteers, especially for GetUp. I am a very active local member of Parliament. During my first term, I did well over 800 community events and I held just under 200 community street corner listening posts and mobile offices at my shopping centres. Never in my first term did I feel unsafe. There was never any aggression from local residents and It was such a distinct and marked change with my experience in 2019. That is why I have felt it important to speak out. I believe that the 2019 campaign was different because of the orchestrated and coordinated campaigns against me by Get Up, Labor and the unions. And it was behaviour that, especially from Get Up, I know was branding me as evil. And I do believe that's what incited the level of aggression within my local community that we've never seen before here in South Australia, and certainly not in the electorate of Boothby. What I would really like is for Get Up, Labor and the unions to justify or reconcile their behaviour and that of their members and what happened to me during the 2019 election campaign with their alleged values. So various unions claim to be on the side of women in the workplace. They claim to be against bullying and discrimination of women in the workplace. They claim to hold safe and respectful workplace training sessions, particularly aimed at stopping gendered violence. They claim, and I quote, that gendered violence needs to be seen through the lens of both an individual and a collective safety issue. So I want to know, why didn't the Australian Nursery and Midwifery Federation, the Australian Education Union, United Voice, the CFMEU, the SDA and the ACTU individually and collectively condemn the stalker, condemn the misogynistic vandalism against me, and condemn dangerous and intimidating behaviour against a woman in public life? Because all of those unions actively campaigned against me. All of them must have known what was going on in Boothby because it was widely reported in the press. I want to know why they didn't condemn all of this behaviour. Do the unions believe in all women? Do they believe that all women matter, or just some? Do they believe in the workplace safety of all Australians, male or female, or just those who share their political views? And I ask the same of the Labor Party. And here's a quote from former Deputy Leader Tanya Plibersek from January 2019, so in the lead up to the last federal election. And she said, and I quote, "Women deserve to be safe and valued at home, on the streets, in our workplaces, and in everything they do." And from Senator Penny Wong, South Australian Senator and one of Labor's most senior women, another quote, and I quote, "Of course, bullying and intimidation in any workplace are unacceptable." And here's Senator Wong again in an interview where she personally attacked me a number of times. And she said in this interview in relation to Labor women, and I quote, "I'd like to talk about the broader issue about how we can try to make sure our parliament and our political parties are places in which women can succeed, where they are judged on merit, where behaviour is called out, where behaviour is dealt with." Senator Wong spent a huge amount of time in my electorate during the lead up to the 2019 campaign. She spent an extensive amount of time personally attacking me and my character and misrepresenting different matters and incidents. And I've searched all of her press statements that she made, the interviews she gave, the doorstops, and nowhere can I find her condemning the behaviour of the stalker and condemning the disgusting sexist and misogynistic vandalism of my campaign office, both of which were widely reported on radio, television and in print media in South Australia. So I say to Senator Wong and Ms Plibersek and to the Labor Party, do all women in Parliament matter, or just some women? Do all women in Parliament, do all people in Parliament have the right to feel safe in their workplace, or just Labor people and Labor women? And the same applies, of course, to Get Up. Get Up have run multiple campaigns claiming to be on the side of women. They claim to play the gender card, they claim to be for gender equality, they claim to highlight the real issues that women are facing today. They ran a campaign claiming to commit to actively working towards creating a positive culture in workplaces in which harassment of women is never acceptable. Get Up has said, and I quote, "Everyone has a right to feel safe at work and to be supported. It's in our collective power to make sure that right is respected." My workplace is my electorate. Getting out and about and listening to my local sports clubs, to my schools, to my service clubs, to volunteer groups, getting out door knocking, getting out holding my listening posts and my mobile offices at shopping centres, around parks, on street corners, across my large electorate is my workplace. Last election, I felt seriously unsafe doing what I had done without a problem for 2.5 years. So what I want to know is, why didn't GetUp actively distance themselves from the stalker? Why did they turn up to events together? Why were they sharing each other's social media posts and liking each other's social media posts? Why didn't GetUp make a statement, a strong statement, condemning the stalking, the sexist and misogynistic vandalism of my campaign office, and the aggressive harassment of me? So, as I've asked of unions and of Labor, I ask of GetUp. Do all women matter, or just women who think like you? Will you, GetUp, will your organisation take a stand against aggression towards candidates and MPs? Or will you continue to engage in dangerous behaviour that led to me being stalked and subjected to degrading and sexist, misogynistic vandalism? I think that what we are seeing here in Australia is the implementation of the type of aggressive campaigning that activists like Saul Alinsky wrote about in what is the Bible of the Left, Rules of Radicals. You know, things like keep the pressure on the individual, pick a target, freeze the target, personalise your campaign, polarise this person and polarise the public against them, attack the individual. So I want to know whether GetUp, Labor and the unions will review their campaign tactics. I want to know if they'll adopt codes of conduct that their members should adhere to keep everyone safe in politics and in public life. And I particularly want to know if they will guarantee that their aggressive tactics, especially against women, will end. I think this is a pivotal moment for us in Australia and in Australian politics. It's a moment for us to decide what sort of country we want to be and what sort of campaigns we want to run. What sort of example do we want to set for the next generation? Do we want to be a nation that debates policy and politics, or do we want to be a nation that engages in personal attacks? Do we want to be a place where all people, and especially women, feel safe in their workplace? GetUp, Labor and the unions have the opportunity to retreat from the hyper-aggressive tactics that they've imported from the United States. They can reset the playbook and return us to a nation where it's about the battle of ideas, not attacking individuals. They can restore civility, respect and tolerance in the public arena, and by doing so, actually adhere to the ideals that they claim to represent. Things like diversity, gender equality, and the safety of men and women in the workplace. If they don't, if they want to continue to focus on prosecuting people rather than policies, we're going to lose good people from public life, and we will discourage good people from putting their hands up in the first place. If GetUp, Labor and the unions continue to encourage and normalise the sort of hatred that we saw in the Boothby campaign, it will only be a matter of time before somebody gets hurt. And that's the end of my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Flint, for your statement, and I'll hand over to Mr. Passon to start the discussion and the questioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole, for your submission and for your evidence. I think it would be hard for any of the committee members not to realise that this has had has taken a personal toll on you, both in the campaign and now having to relive it effectively. And Nicole, I just want to flesh out how your experience, a bit more about your experience with the stalker, David Walsh, and in particular how that made you feel and what impact it had on your ability to campaign.
Thank you, Tony. His behaviour was so out of the ordinary that it was it unnerved me from the very start. He turned up for the first time to a street corner listening post that I was holding with my state colleague, Nicole MP. We had about 20 members of the local community at a railway station discussing how to beautify it and make the local area more attractive, a place where people wanted to spend time rather than an eyesore. He turned up and I asked him to put his name down because we were getting everyone to put their names down so that we could keep them up to date with the work we were doing. And he refused to do so. And then he just started hovering. He was hovering on the edge of the group of about 20 people, had a big camera with a big lens, and then just started taking photos. He refused to participate. He refused to engage. And his behaviour was so odd and unnerving that some of the community members actually said to him, "Can you please stop? Your behaviour is making us really uncomfortable. Just stop it." And eventually, after that, he fled. I followed at a safe distance because it was such unusual behaviour that I thought this is just odd. And so I got his number plate just in case he turned up again. And unfortunately, he did turn up again at many community events. He turned up at one of my street corner meetings after he'd been to quite a few community events that I was present at. And I knew he was there because he would post a lot of information on social media having a go at me after these events. And so it got to the point where I was feeling really unsafe. His behaviour was so odd and out of the ordinary because, as I said in my opening statement, I'm a really active local member. I'd done, well over 1,000 different community events and listening posts in my first 2.5 years in Parliament, and I'd never seen anyone behave like this. So when he turned up to my listening post, where it was just me with a volunteer, I actually confronted him and I said, "You're making me feel really unsafe. You're making me feel very uncomfortable. You won't participate. You won't engage. Why are you here?" And he said, I'm just here to observe and I'll do whatever I want. He had his camera, as he always did. And then I asked him to leave, and I had now Senator Alex Antic turn up. And when Alex turned up, he did leave and said, "You'll be seeing me again." So at that point, I contacted the AFP. The AFP paid him a visit. Again, he challenged them and their authority, said they have no basis on which to stop him following me around the place, and he would continue to do so, which he did. It got to the point where he was posting so much about me online, he was following me to so many events, and making me feel really unsafe that now Senator Alex Antic encouraged me to go to the SA Police, and in fact he went with me to give a statement. They took it incredibly seriously, and between the moment that I went to see the SA Police, within 24 hours, so the next day after I'd made my initial statement, he turned up to my electorate office with Get Up, and they had a really big protest at outside my electorate office. And then he and Get Up both attended an event that I still don't know how they found out about because the media were not alerted to it. It was by invitation only to a small number of community groups for announcement that we were making. It wasn't put on social media. It was in no way publicised. He turned up and proceeded to walk around this community centre. There were 3 sets of windows. He walked to every single window, taking photos in through the windows of me with some local community volunteers. There were Get Up protesters outside the front door. And it was almost bizarrely, I had to go to the police station to sign my statement after that. And I was like, I'm really glad that I've actually gone, that Senator Antic convinced me to go to the police because this behaviour is now actually really scary and dangerous. And so you asked me how I felt. I felt incredibly scared. I felt really concerned for my safety. I still don't know how he found out where I was, especially for that event. When I realised in hindsight, looking at his social media pages, for example, that he'd turned up to a visit that I did with the Prime Minister and that he was in incredibly close proximity to me and I didn't even realise, that's when I became even more fearful for my safety because he could get that close to me without me realising. And in relation to that specific event, he posted some really disgusting sexist commentary in conjunction with those photos. So, you know, because I've traditionally done a lot on my own, because I am fiercely independent, I had to change my behaviour because of the way that he was behaving, because it was unsafe.
So, Nicole, you said you changed your behaviour because you changed your behaviour on account of what you were observing.
Yeah.
Can you just tell me how did that limit your ability to campaign freely towards the end of the campaign?
Absolutely. And especially in May, because he was charged by the police, I think it was the 3rd or 4th of May, and that's when his behaviour had become, to my mind, extreme and made me feel even more unsafe. And it was bizarre behaviour. And as I said, I've never seen before or since, I've never seen anyone else in my community behave like that towards me or towards any other candidate or member. It had a huge impact on my campaigning. Senator Alex Antic and my campaign manager, Sam DeLuc, decided that I couldn't be anywhere on my own, and I actually needed to have a male colleague with me, whether that was a volunteer or a staff member or one of them, which, you know, is pretty challenging when you're used to being so independent, getting out and about, just being able to, you know, change your plans at any time. Instead, I was having to make sure that I had someone with me, so then you've got to work around their time commitments and when they're available as well. I stopped driving my campaign vehicle. The Flintmobile is completely wrapped with my face on it and things, so it's pretty obvious who's in it and where I was and where I was going. And, you know, I drive that as much as possible. And so I stopped driving it. We would just park it in a high profile location each day so that people could still see it, but I wasn't being a mobile campaign billboard myself because you know, it's the absolute heart of the campaign when you're at your busiest. That ability was no longer available to me. I needed to be more discreet about where I was and about people knowing where I was and when I would be places. And that's that's the toughest thing I think about this entire experience, and especially about the stalker, was people need to know where you're going to be. People need to know when you're going to have your street corner listening post or a mobile office so they can turn up and talk to you. So when your location is known on social media, when it's known because you're putting flyers in people's letterboxes, when it's known because you're putting out an advert, that's when you really become concerned about your safety, because when you're experiencing that behaviour, you know that they can find out exactly where you are and where you're going to be and when.
Nicole, can I just flush out the relationship in your mind between GetUp and the stalker? You mentioned on one occasion at least at the private engagement when the photographs were taken through the window that GetUp and the stalker were there together. Can you flesh that out? But also any other examples of that for the benefit of the committee, particularly given that earlier today GetUp disavowed themselves of Mr Walsh. I think it's quite difficult to understand. On the one hand, he was a member, but then he wasn't a member. But I think the balance of their evidence from their perspective, that they had nothing to do with Mr Walsh. He just happened to like their Facebook posts. So perhaps your first-person experience in Boothby?
It wasn't just a matter of liking a few Facebook posts. It was a matter of liking all of their Facebook posts, of sharing each other's content. You know, that's an active choice. It's one thing if you've got an individual out there who's just liking posts, but GetUp was sharing his content. He was sharing their content. He attended their forums. They had community debates and forums. They had a range of protests and protest activity that he attended. I mean, the most obvious one being outside my electorate office on the same day that they then all travelled from my electorate office in Marion up to Blackwood, which is a little bit of a hike, to attend a community event that was by private invitation only, that they couldn't possibly have known about. So they literally worked hand in glove, like the sharing of the posts, sharing of the content, attending each other, or him attending their events, and also, of course, the protest action and turning up to that. Just, that was, sorry, when they attended Blackwood outside the community centre, it was one of the scariest experiences of my life because the behaviour was so extreme and intimidating and shocking because I didn't know how they knew that I was up there. There's no way that they should have been able to know that. And that's when I became most fearful for my safety. What I find most extraordinary, though, is that his stalking behaviour was extensively reported across all media in South Australia. The vandalism of my office, when that occurred later, was extensively reported, and GetUp have barely condemned any of this, and they certainly haven't condemned the stalking behaviour. I mean, I think they've made some broad brush statements about, people shouldn't be in fear of their safety or some such thing, but they have never actively condemned his behaviour, distanced themselves from it, nor said how they would make sure that in future, if this behaviour occurs, and we know it happened to Georgina Downer Upper in Mayo as well, what sanctions they'll take and how they will publicly condemn and discourage this sort of harassment, harassment stalking of particularly of female members and candidates.
Nicole, that was the relationship between GetUp and the stalker. Can you give me your experience of the coordination, if any, between GetUp and Labor in the Beefy campaign?
Well, I think GetUp this morning said, we don't promote or follow or support any particular political party. And yet they had a long hit list of Liberal and National Party candidates and sitting members of Parliament they wanted to get rid of at the start of 2019. They whittled that down to 7 of us, of which I was one. Never have I seen them target a Labor MP. There were no Labor MPs on that list. There were no Greens MPs on that list. They certainly were not going around my electorate attacking the Labor candidate or the Greens candidates. Their how to vote cards supported Labor and the Greens. Like, there is absolutely no evidence of them ever taking a stand against Labor or the Greens. So, and in fact, they actively cross-promote their policies, actively support their candidates. And I note, Penny Wong, and I'm happy to table this if the committee want me to, was even using their language. In January 2019, Senator Penny Wong was using language like hard right to describe me, which is precisely the same language that GetUp were using.
Nicole, I've just got a couple more questions before I hand over to Senator Betts. Firstly, you were obviously listening this morning, so how do you feel about GetUp today disavowing responsibility for David Walsh?
I just think it's disgraceful, and they had the opportunity to condemn dangerous behaviour, particularly targeted towards female candidates and members of Parliament. They failed to do so. They failed to condemn his behaviour at all. They failed to distance themselves from him. I was just really shocked and disappointed.
Nicole, you would have, as I did today, hear that the GetUp National Director, Austin, was and did have access to the live stream. Presumably he was listening and watching, and yet wasn't willing, the man who's responsible for the GetUp campaign in the 2019 federal election, and presumably GetUp's behaviour towards you in particular, the person responsible for that wasn't prepared to come and give evidence and be subject to questions in the committee this morning. How did that make you feel?
Well, I think it was very consistent with the behaviour that we have seen him exhibit, which is he will light the fuse of the bomb and let his staff or his volunteers or his members or people that they have encouraged to take extreme behaviour go and throw those bombs at people out in public life. So he clearly does not want to take responsibility for the manner in which his organisation, his volunteers and people who have been incited to dangerous behaviour by the horrible messages that his organisation put into electorates. I just find it quite extraordinary, but completely consistent. He doesn't want to take responsibility.
Let's hope if asked by the committee, he'll present himself for questioning. Back to you, Mr. Chair, but I understand Senator Abetz like to take it.
Yes, thank you, Chair, if I may. And
yes, Senator Abetz, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Flint, for your submission. Can I first ask, did the stalking that you were subjected to ever make you feel like stopping the campaigning and being out in public? Because I know that Get Up in Tasmania during the 2016 election did that to the wife of one of our sitting members, followed her around door to door with a video camera, and in the end she just gave up. Did you have similar thoughts going through your mind that is it all worth it?
Absolutely, Senator Abetz, especially during the month of May. So, you know, right in the actual midst of the campaign, we had 3 weeks of pre-polls. So pre-polls started at the start of May. You know, it's the absolute critical time for a candidate or an MP to be out there. And that's when their protest activity ramped up. You know, that's when we were doing more and more community debates. Boothby has an incredible, wonderful tradition of having community debates each election at the state level for all of my state seats in the area and at the federal level. And last time they all went really, you know, everyone was very polite, very calm, everyone could get their point across. This time I was being shouted down. I couldn't finish my sentences. So it was absolutely very much Get Up, but it was also the union protesters. I'm sure there were some Labor people in there as well. It was very well organised. It was no longer a community debate. It was a debate that had been hijacked by activists who just wanted to intimidate me. Get Up had a huge presence on polling booths where they were very aggressive. Their volunteers were very aggressive. I don't think some of them were local people, and I don't believe that they engaged in that behaviour, but the people that they shipped in from other areas were highly aggressive towards my volunteers, towards me. As you've mentioned, you know, putting the phone in your face to record you when they put questions to you, all of that sort of thing. And the protest action. So you never know when they're going to turn up. I mean, it was to the extent that I was shooting a little video and doing some photos with 2 of my state MPs at one of our local projects, and a Get Up or Labor protest person across the road at the train station saw us. Literally within 10 minutes, they had a group of about 20 people there, Labor and Get Up, running across the road at us. That's the sort of, it's just intimidation in every single way possible. And again, the protest action, you know, as I said, people know where we're going to be. So then, of course, you do become fearful about, am I going to be safe? Is the stalker going to be there? Am I going to get shouted down? You know, is this going to disrupt what I'm doing? So and I guess the thing that really challenged me the most was by that stage needing to have a male volunteer staff member or colleague like Sam DeLork or Alex Antic with me for my protection. Like, that's hugely psychologically challenging as a woman who values her independence. And it was purely because of the manner in which they behaved and the aggression that they incited in my local community, which we have never seen before here in South Australia.
And that behaviour, Ms. Flint, was not based on issues, but was highly personal, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Yes, and I do just want to read from some of the unsolicited community feedback as to what was being said about me. It wasn't about policy, it was about me. And this is a direct quote, and the committee have access to this, everyone does in fact, because this is in the appendices of my submission. So this is the phone calls that Get Up were making. And I quote, they immediately started talking about MP Nicole Flint, and I quote, how evil Nicole Flint is and how she is the worst and most evil person. He eventually explained that they were instructed by senior Get Up members to give this message out to everyone because of MP Nicole Flint. Some other derogatory, foolish claims were made regarding MP Nicole Flint personally, such as her just being a pretty face and dumb. The whole conversation revolved around unsubstantiated and fickle personal attacks on MP Nicole Flint. And the following quotes are from the Advertiser Online, letters to the editor and comments online in relation to Get Up and Labor's efforts. And I quote again, Get Up's dirty tactics, the vitriol and hate that Nicole has had towards her from vile Get Up people. Get Up have gone out of their way to target Nicole. Spin it any way you like, Get Up are bullies. Nicole has been intensively targeted by Get Up, unions and local Green activists. The level of attack from Labor Green mob and their grubby Get Up partners has at times been appalling. So
all right.
It was deeply personal, Senator.
And so, Ms Flint, you may have heard the evidence this morning where those two people who sought to represent Mr Oosting, who refused to come on, albeit he was available by live stream, asserted to us that Get Up was 100% issues based. Describing you as evil, etc., hardly falls into the category of issues based, and therefore would you want to make any reflection on that assertion, which is so demonstrably shown to be false by the evidence that you've just given?
Senator, as I said in my opening statement, I think this is an opportunity for Get Up to decide what sort of organisation they want to be, what sort of nation they want to see us be, and what sort of example they want to set, especially for younger people who might be thinking about putting their hand up for public life. With what I've been through, it's hard to recommend, especially to younger women, that they should put their hand up to go to potentially put themselves through this. So Get Up have double standards. You know, the quotes that I read out in my opening statement about all of the things they say about gender equality, about women's safety, about preventing women from being harassed, are the antithesis of what they did to me and their volunteers did to me, particularly through their phone calls during the last election campaign. So I'm just calling Get Up out for their hypocrisy. It's rank hypocrisy, and they need to decide if this is the manner in which they intend to continue conducting themselves.
In brief, what you're saying is if Get Up didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all. But can I ask you, the tactics employed by Get Up, by Union and Labor were virtually identical, with use of language, as you indicated with Senator Wong's employment of language, that they were together on many an occasion. And given all that evidence, do you think Get Up should be declared an associated entity because of how closely they do work with the left side of politics, namely Labor and the Australian Greens?
Absolutely, yes. Until they start putting Labor MPs on their hit list or Green MPs on their hit list, until they start actively campaigning against Labor and Greens MPs, and they don't. I mean, we know that they don't. We know that they are there to target people from the Liberal Party, people from the National Party, and yes, they should be declared an associated entity. There is no evidence of them holding any other party to account, of attacking any other candidate within my seat of Boothby at the last election. They are clearly on the side of Labor and the Greens and the unions.
Ms. Flint, you've been exceptionally brave and outspoken in putting all this on the public record here at this committee, but also in media appearances. Can I ask you, have you received any apology or statement of regret from any officials from GetUp as to the behaviours to which you were subjected?
No, and nor have I from Labor or the unions either. And because, as you've said, Senator Abetz, my experience has been extensively documented, because I thought it was important to speak out in the hope that we can stop this behaviour at this point in time in Australia. I don't want to see us go further down the aggressive American path where you're tearing down individuals rather than, prosecuting and fighting it out on the battle of ideas, which is what this is supposed to be about. I call on them all to have a very close look at what they did and how they did it, and come out and say that they will not conduct themselves in this manner anymore.
And all these organisations, of course, seek to assert that they encourage young women to enter politics. And yet they behaved like that to yourself. Can I ask, given the behaviour of GetUp and all that you've detailed in such an exact manner, do you believe that Mr. Oosting, as the head of the GetUp organisation, one, ought to front this committee to give a personal account of his knowledge and behaviour, and whether he ought to reflect on whether he can, with all integrity, continue in his position in charge of GetUp?
Yes, absolutely. I would very much like him to front this committee and to make himself accountable for the actions of his staff members, of his volunteers, of his members. And we heard this morning that apparently, membership is a pretty loose term within the GetUp organisation. So anyone essentially can be classed as a member. Absolutely, I would like him to explain himself. And also, just again on GetUp, Labor and the unions, we've focused a lot on the behaviour of the stalker, which was the extreme and most dangerous part of what I endured. But the deeply sexist and misogynistic vandalism of my campaign office 2 days before the election was also deeply upsetting. And again, there was no condemnation from GetUp and Labor and the unions. There were no statements about this is unacceptable language for a female member of parliament to be subjected to, suggesting that I'm a prostitute and a skank. Nothing. There was absolute silence. And once again, this was widely reported throughout South Australian media. So I just call on all GetUp, Labor and the unions to have a good hard look at themselves, to review what they're doing and how they're doing it, and what they're going to do to help keep women safe in Australian public life.
Well, the two good things to come out of all this is that you have shown your strength, your character, your backbone to get through all this. Congratulations. And secondly, that the burghers of Boothby ensured that you were re-elected with an increased majority. So well done. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Abetz.